Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. We welcome you to this talk on socio-legal implication of the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. This talk is the follow-up of a series of previous highly successful online conversation about socioeconomic inequality in the Global South, particularly in Latin America, which took place between May and July this year. Those online conversations created a friendly space in which alumni and faculty had the opportunity to reconnect and to engage in an intellectually enriching dialogue. We think that the COVID pandemic has created obstacles to meet in person, that's right. But also we think that it has generated new online opportunities for the Oñati community to start new or continue with this socio-legal conversation that once began in Oñati. So our hope is that with this webinar series, we can strengthen our Oñati community bond and come together to discuss, challenge, and rethink some of the global socio-legal challenges of our time. We would like to bring together these alumni, faculty, and friends of the International Institute for Sociology of Law to discuss some of the most pressing and contemporary socio-legal problems of our time. And we have also good news because we are about to start like a new line of webinars, which will consist on presenting the doctoral thesis of former master's students of the Institute just before their official defense. So we will start next November 22 with Fatima El Faqih from Venezuela. And she will defend in Girona, Spain, her PhD. And the topic of the talk would be the Spanish Reflexionando sobre el pluralismo jurídico en Venezuela. We will have another similar talk in January by Inza Palacin. She will defend in February her PhD in Italy. So we will have the opportunity to hear her presentation about the PhD. And of course, we continue with also with the general webinar series. We started in September talking about Afghanistan, and in December we will have a new one offered by Johannes Fes, who was the former scientific director of the Institute, Gemma Barona, former master student and also professor. And they will talk about, does the prison abolition have a chance? So as you see, we have many interesting activities in mind. So now, before introducing our speakers, I would like, of course, to thank them for having accepted to give this talk, but also I would like to thank all the participants for attending this talk, and we hope that at the end in the debate you participate actively. And a special thanks to Inza Palacin and Leopoldo Cruz, former master's student, because they are supporting all the time to organizing this webinar. So thank you to both of you. So let me introduce the speakers. Two are former master's students and one is visiting scholars. So Annette Lansing is a former head of the Department of Public Law and former Dean of the School of Law at the University of Venda, South Africa. She holds law degrees from universities in South Africa and the Netherlands. She has extensive experience in higher education management. Her research interests and publications are in the areas of public international law, human rights law, gender, the decolonization of law, and transformation of higher education. The second speaker is Elijah Tukbarida Jean, Spanish pronunciation, is a lecturer at the Faculty of Law of the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. Currently, Elijah teaches jurisprudence, critical thinking in law, criminal law, and introduction to sociology. Before joining the Faculty of Law, he worked with the Department of Social Development as a social development practitioner for 7 years. In his capacity as the aftercare officer, he functioned as the liaison officer between prison inmates, their families, and barristers. Elijah is a product of the University of Cape Coast in Ghana and the Oñati International Institute for the Sociology of Law. He is also an alumnus of the Institute for Global Law and Policy at Harvard Law School, a recipient of a scholarship awards from the Scholar Writing Workshop in Bangkok, Thailand, and the Global Scholars Academy in Geneva. Elijah has co-edited 2 books and co-authored 1 book. He also has some articles and book chapters to his credit. And the third speaker, Victor Morris is currently the Director of Student Development and Learning Support Services at the William Tubman University in Harper City in Liberia. He also serves as an adjunct lecturer at the university teaching Liberian history, eco-literature, gender, feminism, and contemporary literature. Before that, he served as a compliance officer of the university and economic research analyst at the Ministry of Planning. He's a product of master's formal students of the International Institute for Sociology or Law, as Elijah, and was a recipient of an EU grant for graduate studies. He is an alumnus of the African Methodist Episcopal University in Liberia. He is a member of the Social Science Research Network and has been in higher education since 2012. Mr. Morris is currently researching the impact of technical, vocational, and higher education among Liberian females. So thank you again to Elijah, Victor, and Annette. So now you can, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Susanna, for the introduction. And I also like to thank my colleagues and all participants. When this issue of socio-legal implications of the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa came out, to me, it appeared a bit broad. So I thought of narrowing it down to something specific, because the implications of COVID-19 is quite huge. So I decided to focus on how COVID-19 is impacting prisons in Ghana, as well as how the legal rights of inmates are mediated. Now, I would like to state that Ghana is a democracy, and as a democracy, the country is governed by laws. Supreme to all the laws is the 1992 Constitution. And Chapter 5 of this Constitution clearly spells out the rights of citizens, which include respect for human dignity and fair trial. Almost all issues of rights captured in this Constitution take inspiration from some continental and international covenants, such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, among others. It is this Constitution that gives credence to the establishment of the Ghana Prison Service as stipulated in Article 2051. And I use the term or the word credence because the current prison system we have is a colonial legacy, even though we have seen much improvement. In this talk, like I stated earlier, I would like to focus on how COVID-19 has impacted prisons or is impacting prisons in Ghana, as well as how the rights of inmates are mediated within the context of the pandemic. Now, considering my focus, I would like to give a brief background of the Ghana Prison Service. And this will encapsulate the state of the prisons before COVID-19. First of all, I would like to state that the prison has three mandates. First has to do with to ensure the safe custody of inmates. The second one has to do with to promote the welfare of inmates. And to promote the welfare of inmates in this context means that the prison has the responsibility of supplying basic needs such as food, such as water, bedding, and many other things. And this would also include the fact that the prison allows visitation. That is, families and friends of inmates are allowed to visit these inmates. It is also important within the context of promotion of welfare of inmates that inmates are allowed to access the court as well as access their lawyers, because it is a legal right. Now, I have stated that to ensure the self-custody of inmates and to promote the welfare of inmates, which I have tried to expand it a bit. But the third mandate has to do with reformation and rehabilitation. And in the context of reformation and rehabilitation, it has to do with providing vocational training, literacy education, and agriculture training for inmates. Now, against this mandate or against this backdrop, before COVID-19, some prison scholars and industry players had already documented the overcrowding nature of most prisons in Africa. In the case of Ghana, as of June 2021, the data available suggests that the total number of prisoners was 13,200, which exceeds the authorized capacity of 9,945. This means that the authorized capacity has been exceeded by 3,255 inmates, and this translates into 32.65% of overcrowding, with remand prisoners being 11.56%. In fact, some prison scholars, through empirical research, have established that some prison cells actually meant to accommodate 4 inmates now accommodate between 8 to 20 inmates. This is quite strange. But then in a study I conducted with some colleagues, Professor Nelson Kofi, I can see he's online, Dr. Peter Topare, and Kranti Sechi, we also arrived at the same findings, which means that the issue of overcrowding, the issue of the cells accommodating what is mandated is real. And this actually also exceeds the United Nations recommendations of 4 inmates to a cell. This actually made sleeping or bedding arrangements quite difficult for inmates, to the extent that some inmates would have to run shifts. And running shift means that a particular inmate will sleep on the mattress or on the floor for 2 hours and get up for another to also sleep for 2 hours. In fact, this issue of overcrowding is nothing new so far as contemporary literature on penology is concerned. And it is also not new in terms of the media space. And I would like to show a picture so that we can actually appreciate the overcrowding situation and the burden challenges faced by these inmates or the prison. Yes, I hope this picture can be seen by all.
Sure.
Yes, so this is a prison cell, and this is how the inmates sleep. So this is the reality of it. Let me show you another one. This is what it looks like when inmates are released from their cells. Now, considering the rate of overcrowding and bedding challenges in prisons in Ghana, and I mean in most parts of Africa, a COVID-19 infection in the prison will mean a doom for the prison population. In fact, some social commentators and many other people feared for COVID-19 infection in the prison. And I really do not fault them or blame them for thinking this way, because considering the state of prisons in Ghana, one would have thought in that same direction. But that was not the case. What was expected? I mean, even during the peak of the pandemic, we had people in the news talking about the fact that the likelihood that we will see dead bodies on the streets of most African countries was going to be high. But we didn't see that. And likewise, we also didn't see that in respect of the prisons in Ghana. The question which I posed is, how did the prison navigate its way to avoid COVID-19 infection amidst these poor conditions? Now, coming up with this question, I attempted to address it empirically, which means I had the opportunity to talk to some prison administrators, some inmates, and some recently discharged ex-convicts. And they had something very interesting to tell me, which I am going to base to explain why perhaps the prison did not experience a COVID-19 outbreak. Now, when COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic, prison administrators initiated COVID-19 education program. By this, prisoners were educated on the mode of transmission of the virus and its deadly consequences. Inmates were shown videos of mass deaths and mass burials in other countries. This made the prisoners to take the pandemic serious. Likewise, at the regular prison officers' parade, officers took the opportunity to educate themselves and update themselves as well on the preventive measures of COVID-19, which means that the education did not only go in one direction, but it flowed from both ways. Inmates, prisoners educated, prison officers educated inmates, whilst at the same time they took the opportunity to educate and update themselves on the necessary measures. Though as part of the rise of inmates, it is part of the rise of inmates to receive visitors. At the peak of the pandemic in Ghana, prison visitations by families and friends were halted by the prison administration. This was not done authoritatively, even though the prison had the power to do that, but it did this in consultation with the leadership of inmates. And I'm saying with the leadership of inmates because in prisons in Ghana, we have, the inmates are categorized. They have statuses within the prison. We have an inmate who could be described as an attorney or a lawyer. We had an inmate judge. We had the national president, who happens to be the leader of all the inmates within the prison. So we had all these structures. I mean, we have all these structures in place within prison facilities. So the prison engaged the hierarchy of the prisoners, and they arrived at that decision. Even though one may consider this maybe as a legal justification for why they should prevent, the families should or friends should not visit inmates, the question would be, is the decision informed by a human rights-based approach? I ask this question because many prisoners from interactions lamented on halting visitations as a violation of their rights. and pointed to the prison standing orders. Well, from a positivist law perspective, as a written law, visitation amounts to rights to be enjoyed by prisoners. Yet, during the peak of the pandemic, this right was violated. Another strategy used by prison administrators was the routine protocols to be observed by all inmates and prison officers. And these protocols include regular hand washing, the use of face masks as it is popular everywhere, as well as the regular checking of temperatures. In Ghana, it is common to see Veronica buckets everywhere because the education was that the more we wash our hands, we take our personal hygiene issues serious, the more we are likely to prevent COVID-19 infection. In fact, the prison officers also subjected themselves to these protocols because to some extent they had contact with the outside world. And in order for them not to come in with the infection, they also subjected themselves to the existing protocols. And this was to prevent a prison officer actually infecting a prisoner with the virus. In fact, it would have been very strange for inmates to talk about how they managed to prevent infection without referring to their religious beliefs. So some inmates, some ex-convicts, some prison officers actually said that they prayed during the pandemic and God actually heard their prayers. So what we see now as prisons in Ghana with COVID-free cases is actually a reflection of their answered prayers. All these measures are still ongoing. All these also show how COVID-19 has impacted or is impacting prisons in Ghana, as well as how prison administrators have responded or are responding to the pandemic. Now, in respect of the legal rights of prisoners, such as access to court, a lawyer, relevant court documents to aid appeal processes, among others, I would like to state here that before COVID-19, this was a challenge, but not as major as during this COVID era. Now, as I stated in the second mandate of the Ghana Prison Service, the prison is to ensure the welfare of prisoners, of which these legal rights form a part. With COVID-19, this is what actually transpired in the prison. Prisoners hardly accessed the court for hearing. Most cases of prisoners were adjourned through phone calls from the court registrar. So if a prisoner had to attend court on, say, 11th or 10th November, on that day or a day before, the court warrant officer will get a phone call from the court registrar indicating that the case has been adjourned. Some cases were adjourned more than 6 times. This actually means that convicted prisoners who were appealing their sentences, as well as remand prisoners were not heard during the peak of the pandemic. And as most of us may be aware, there is a legal maxim that says justice, and I quote, justice denied, justice delayed is justice denied. This means that cases should be heard without unnecessary delay, as to do otherwise leads to great injustice for the accused person. This was the case because of COVID-19. Sometimes it took many months for the case of a remand prisoner or a convicted prisoner to be heard. It was also revealed that lawyers hardly visited their clients in prison. And all these are the results of fear of COVID-19 infection. It is important to add that when COVID got to its peak in Ghana, some regions were locked down, and this was common across many countries in the world. During the period of lockdown, the judicial service was classified as a service that actually renders essential services. And as a result, they were allowed to go to work. To mean that the staff of Judicial Service of Ghana were supposed to report at work in order to aid in justice administration. The Judicial Service, in line with an executive order, designed a shift system to regulate the number of staff who come to work at a particular time.
Thank you very much. Let me firstly say, it's glad to be here. It took me more than anything to get online. It has been very, very disappointing. We have challenges in Liberia with respect to internet connectivity, especially the part of Liberia I am is I'm in the southeastern part of the country. I'm pretty close to the Côte d'Ivoire, and there are a lot of challenges here. Notwithstanding, I'm glad to be on this platform. I want to say thanks to Susanna. I call her my mother in Spain. And I also want to thank Jose Ramon for the time we spent at Onyanti. Well, with respect to the issue, COVID-19 had its own impact on Liberia as a country. I can be able to make this delivery because it's quite challenging here. But with respect to the COVID-19 lockdown, this huge lockdown as a result of the state, what we had here was as a result of mitigatory measures by government to ensure that our borders were closed, to ensure that we don't have the prevalence of the pandemic. So with respect to prevalence of the COVID in Liberia, we did not have that case. What really happened was that the president, who has the executive, came with a presidential declaration. And as a result of that declaration, the military was instructed to enforce certain health regulations by the Ministry of Health, as was released by the World Health Organization, because COVID-19 being considered a global health crisis, countries had to conform to the regulations by the international health institutions. So the military was given the task to ensure that the COVID-19 regulations were enforced across the country. So you have military personnel posted across Liberia to ensure that those regulations from government were adhered to. As a result of the lockdown, it was not long-lived because, like I said, in 2014, the experience with the Ebola virus disease, Liberians were already aware of what a pandemic is. So we did not have to go through a lot of orientation in terms of educating Liberians what to expect as a result of the pandemic. So ordinary Liberians had to, just be giving some brief information with respect to what's the difference between the Ebola virus disease and what's the COVID-19. And as a result of some medical practitioners and medical doctors who were around, they provided the education through the Ministry of Health, and the citizens had to just comply with respect to those pieces of information that were being provided. Liberia is relatively peaceful as a result of the Ebola virus, the COVID-19. What has been the situation is that people have this passive way of responding to wearing of masks, keeping social distance, and things like that. So we did not have a lot of resistance from the ordinary citizens reacting to government regulations, because on the overall, it was about public safety. So people had to just fall in line with whatever regulatory measures that came from the government. As a result of measures imposed by the legislature, like I said previously, ordinary Liberians bought into the idea easily because everybody could see that this was about public safety and it was about avoiding the spread of the pandemic. So Liberians were very cooperative in compliance with the imposition coming from the national government. Unlike other countries, it was a resolution coming from the national legislature and executed by the executive. Unfortunately for us in Liberia, it was just a presidential decree. So the only thing that came from the national legislature was providing support to ensure that those basic necessities that were to be provided from national government to ordinary citizens were provided. So like the EVD, Liberians were still knowledgeable of the risks associated with the pandemic, and they were also cognizant of the importance of the social distancing and the hand washing process. So we have very little education to provide ordinary Liberians because the only information they needed was that the only difference between the COVID-19 and the Ebola virus disease was that it was just a different strain of virus. So we did not have a lot of education to provide to them. Between 2020 and 2021, we had few restrictions coming from the national government. So we did not have a lot of information to come to citizens. And as a result of the situation right now in Liberia, people are a little hesitant with respect to taking vaccines because as we speak, we have the COVID, the Johnson & Johnson, we have the AstraZeneca, and we have a vaccine that is yet to be introduced to Liberians. So with respect to the vaccination in terms of being responsive to the pandemic, Liberians are hesitant when it comes to the issue of the pandemic. With respect to the future, in terms of what to expect, Liberians are a little hesitant when it comes to COVID-19 vaccination and building their own resistance, because what is happening is that you do not have a lot of information coming from health authorities to ordinary Liberians in terms of what kind of vaccines to take, what are the side effects, like in the United States where people are now using booster vaccines. In Liberia, many persons are hesitant in being vaccinated because they do not know what the side effects are going to be, because the level of information provided to the ordinary citizen is not sufficient enough to convince someone to get vaccinated. So as a result, health authorities are into constant education being provided to ordinary citizens to take the vaccine. So you will realize that in the future, we're not praying that we should have a prevalence of the pandemic, but you will realize that in Liberia in particular, if you should have the prevalence of the virus, a lot of persons are going to get affected because people are hesitant with respect to getting vaccinated because of the level of information are coming from health authorities. As we speak, as at last week, like 6 cases of the COVID, but according to the health minister, these individuals are responding to medication and 5 are close to recovery. Of the 6, 1 is in the capital Monrovia, and 5 cases were reported in the part of Liberia I am, Maryland County in particular. But these 5 cases are in medical centers and they are being responded to. So with respect to the prevalence of the virus, I mean, that's it. Now, as it relates to the education system in Liberia, the COVID-19 affected the educational sector of Liberia compared to other sectors in Liberia as it relates to social legal implications. So yes, I'm wrapping up. As a result of the COVID-19, the secondary education sector was greatly affected because Liberia is part of the West African region, and normally secondary schools, to complete secondary school, have to take what you call the West African Examinations Council Certificate Exam, called WAS. As a result of the pandemic, high school students had to cut short their curriculum because of the pandemic. Schools had to close, and unfortunately for these students, they had to go and face the WAS. So as a result, senior students going to the WAS were not adequately prepared as a result of taking the national exams. And as a result of that, most of them would be disenfranchised from entering the university because Like the Tubman University in particular, a prerequisite to entering the university is you must provide your West African certificate to complete high school. So as a result of the academic programs being affected in Liberia, as a result of the educational sector, specifically secondary education, had to be affected. So as it relates to Liberia, that's where we are.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Victor. And so now I think we can move to Annette's presentation. Annette, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, perfectly.
Great. I'm thanking my brothers, Victor Morris, and let me start my video. I'm thanking my brothers, Victor and Elia. Thank you very much for your sharing your experience. I'm talking about South Africa today, and we have little time left. So I think what I'm going to do is just highlight a few aspects. And because I really would like us to keep some time for questions. I see Professor Hirsch there, whose work I admire. I see Professor Coffey from the United States. So I really would like us to keep at least 10 minutes. So as I said, let me start quickly. My talk actually draws from a book, from a chapter of a book that is going to be released quite soon. It is a book on conformity to international human rights law of state responses to the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. And the book is an international project of the International Partnership and an LLM program in human rights and democratization in Africa, which is run by the University of Pretoria in South Africa, together with 12 international partner universities, including universities in Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Mozambique, Senegal, and also the University of the Western Cape and University of Venda in South Africa. The book is edited by Professor Kwatko Apiage Achuba from the University of Ghana. I would like to, start off to highlight some aspects of our response. Of course, it was an unprecedented situation that we are faced, that we had not faced in 100 years since the so-called Spanish flu, which of course was not a Spanish flu, but a flu that just was given a name from Spain. And we had to, not only South Africa, but all countries in the world had to find new ways of dealing with the pandemic and take extraordinary measures because it was completely unknown what this pandemic would do. So in South Africa, we declared a national state of disaster under the Disaster Management Act and issued regulations that had the effect of limiting a wide range of constitutionally protected human rights. In other words, South Africa did not declare a state of emergency, but a state of national disaster. The South African government adopted a risk-based strategy to address, prevent, and combat the novel coronavirus with levels 1 to 5. And currently we are on level 1, which is the lowest level, but we are still, since 23 March 2020, thus for more than 500 days, still in a national state of disaster. In March 2015, we were put on level 5, which was a very strict and one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. Spain, of course, also had a very strict lockdown. And it included, not many countries had that, it included restrictions, freedom of movement, not traveling, all businesses were closed, and also the sale of cigarettes was prohibited and the sale of alcohol. And there are not many countries in the world that went to that extent. I know countries in the world where alcohol sale is regarded as an essential service. Nonetheless, the South African situation calls for its own peculiarities, one can say. Of course, it was challenged. So I want to make six points, and without going too much in legal detail. Some of these points are peculiar to South Africa, others are to be found in many countries as well. And these, of course, point to the lessons to be learned from this experience, and it is an experience which is still going on. So the first point is why South Africa did not use a state of emergency, but a state of national disaster. And it is, of course, why did we not do that? And also interesting in this regard is that the African Charter of Human and People's Rights does not even make provision for a state of emergency. In other words, it does not make provision to derogate from rights, only to limit rights. Second point, and again, I obviously cannot deal with all of these, which I would have loved to, but it will take an hour. The second point that I looked at was, the sweeping powers granted to the executive. And the question is, were these powers indeed necessary? And how do we determine when they are necessary? And of course, international human rights law is a good point to look at, for example. Third, not for example, in addition to national constitutional law in South Africa. The third point is the shift of power from the legislature to the executive, which is a trend, of course, which commenced before the COVID-19 pandemic, not only in South Africa, but in many countries in the world. And of course, this raises questions of democratic legitimacy because of the measures being such far-reaching measures. These measures were taken by ministerial regulation. And that leads us to the fourth point. What is the role of the judiciary, and what should the role of the judiciary be in a public health pandemic? The question is, in South Africa, what did the judiciary do? And of course, in my article, I look at the cases that have been decided in South Africa. There were many challenges. But also, what should the judiciary do? Must they defer to the government of the day? Or is there space for the judiciary to test the necessity and the proportionality of the measures taken by the government, in particular, whether there are less restrictive means available? Fifth point I want to make is about the heavy-handed tactics and the deployment of the South African National Defence Force, which has led to the killing of a number of people and a large number, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of arrests. And the heavy-handed tactics we don't only find in South Africa, but we have found them in many countries in Africa. And was it indeed, the question that raises whether it was necessary to deploy the National Defence Force to oversee the enforcement of the measures. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. And I think you can
okay, great.
3 or 4 minutes if you want.
Yes, I know. And the sixth point is the impact on the poor, which has, of course, been in South Africa very disastrous and very unequal. South Africa being a country that is the most unequal country in the world. And the pandemic, as estimates from the World Bank, for example, says, but also from Oxfam, that did some research in South Africa, wrote a report in 2020 about the inequality in South Africa. But in general, what the pandemic would actually, what is expected, that the pandemic would lead to having 100 million more people in 2020, or not only expected, that was the case, living in extreme poverty. And by the end of 2021, 34% of the people living in Africa are expected to be living in extreme poverty. South Africa, as I said, is a very unequal country in the world. 90% of the population owns 10% of the wealth. In other words, 90% of the wealth is owned by 10% of the people. Let me maybe, give some space for discussions. I have lots of points that I would have loved to discuss. In particular, the point that I'm trying to make in the chapter in the book is the fragility of human rights and the ease with which we actually gave up human rights. Of course, we expect, and the government, obviously, we must give leeway to the government and all countries that has been done. Again, because of the magnitude of the pandemic and the unprecedented nature of the pandemic. So there was a lot unknown, but we imposed a strict lockdown when we had 400 cases of corona and 5 deaths. And again, I think South Africa handled it well in the beginning. They also did the right thing. They also were commended by the World Health Organization for acting swiftly, unlike some of the other countries in the world, the UK, the United States, and Brazil, for example. So it was a good thing that the initial reaction of the government was right. But support for that waned as the time went on, and the rationality of some of the measures was questioned. And we, as I said, there is no time limit to being ruled by decree, by ministerial regulations. And I'm going to leave it for now. I hope there's time for questions and that we can elaborate on a number of very interesting cases that have come to the fore. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annette. Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Elia. I think I am replacing Susanna, who had to leave today, but we will carry on our discussion now. But I think the 3 presentations have raised many interesting issues and will connect with some of the strands that we're dealing with in many of our Oñati community webinars. I think Elias' issue and strand, with the enormous help of some of the photos that he put up, which were incredibly telling, was going to the micro-analysis of the situation regarding the inmates. And this is going to connect very well with next webinar, which is going to be on the issue of abolitionism of prisons. And I think there will be enough debate there. And of course, the pandemic has shown or has given a further argument to those abolitionist arguments, and especially considering the major principle of the well-being of the inmates. I think Victor's presentation has also raised interesting points regarding more constitutional points regarding the relations between executive and legislature, and to what extent the intervention of the legislature brings in the necessary legitimacy perspective, whereas perhaps the executive is more looking at emergency measures, and of course with the risk of these emergency measures becoming a gateway for abuse of power. And I think largely much of the discussion has moved to a more, I think, a global discussion about the major issues. I think, Annette, your presentation has very, very well connected with much of what we were analyzing concerning Latin America in the seminars that we had, because many interesting and common topics have been raised. But of course, the issue about what the judiciary is doing in respect to the other powers and what it should do actually, to what extent it should exercise a thorough control or not, are very interesting issues. And of course, the notion of emergency is there once again as opening up a possible gateway to exceptions, but as long as there is a clear view as to why these exceptions are necessary and for how long and under what conditions, maybe the situation can be amenable. But of course, that is really the point for the debate. We would now call it off. It has been a very, very interesting webinar. I thank the three speakers and all the participants. I think we have all learned and we have been able to see how there's some specific issues that concern Africa, but many of the questions that are raised are global questions that have been faced by other societies as well. Even if we look at a specific topic like prison population, but also, the more global issues about the relationship between the powers of the state, the role of the judiciary, the over tempting role of the executive in abusing emergency measures, and the limited role of many legislators. We have seen all that, but also the hierarchy of rights, this idea that Annette put forward, that there are some rights that are non-negotiable and to which you could not apply the principle of proportionality, and other rights where you do apply the principle of proportionality. But of course, these are global issues as well. We have been dealing with them in other webinars, and this just shows how I think what a great idea it was to organize this specific webinar on the African situation. We know that these have been only 3 case studies. Africa is a very complex and very rich continent. There is many issues that probably, I'm sure, have been left untouched, but the ones we did touch have been very illuminating. So thank you very much to all the speakers and all the participants. And we will meet for the next webinar. It will be Johannes Fest dealing with the question that Elia was raising, or related to it, at least maybe a follow-up from it, which is the question of abolitionism, which, as you know, is one of the interesting questions about prisons in being discussed in Europe and the United States right now, but not only. So thank you all, and have a great end of the day and continuation of the week. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jose Ramon. Thank you for all the participants and the listeners. Thank you very much.
It was lovely. Yes, lovely to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you all.
I see lots of. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, brothers and
Thanks for the
sisters.
invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very
Bye.
much for